Oh yeah, smooth as butter. Look at that. Of course they work, why wouldn't they work? Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to the channel. In today's part 2 episode, we are going to go over the installation of the Helm Fabrication high clearance rear bumper, rear tire carrier, the reverse camera relocate, as well as wiring up the reverse lights from Diode Dynamics. We're gonna start working from this bag here with the T-handle in it, and we're only gonna need the stainless steel plate and these two Phillips head screws in here. So this plate basically goes over on the hinge side, and it's gonna mimic and line up with all the holes, and the screws go in here. The next step I'm gonna show you dry before I grease everything because it's just gonna be a mess during that portion. But basically you take your bearing here, and there's one on each side. You insert it like so, and you're gonna insert it, it's kind of cone shaped, and the cone goes down. And obviously that's going to be heavily greased. And then your dust cap is going to seal on top of that, and it's basically going to seal this entire assembly. And then you take your spacer off your bolt here. That's the way it's shipped. And then the spacer inserts through here, and it all kind of clamps together. This is what's gonna make your tire carrier swing super smooth. And definitely use rubber gloves on this because packing these bearings is gonna be crazy messy. And I'm also using some Master Pro high temp disc brake wheel bearing grease. And the way I'm greasing, I'm basically taking a glob, and I'm going at a downward angle, and I'm pressing this grease into between this part of the bearing and the actual outer part of the bearing here. So that one is packed, and I'm going to insert it into the bottom. And I'm hoping the gravity will just kind of keep it in there. Gravity and a lot of grease. All right, on to the next one. Now with a new clean pair of gloves, I'm gonna grab my dust cap, and I'm gonna insert it in here. And with a dead blow mallet, all I'm gonna do is tap it in. And now the other side. And just check, run your finger around it, make sure it's nice and flush. If there's a high part, just course it in. Now we're gonna take our silver spacers and insert them from the bottom and the top. The next step is actually installing the tire carrier into the bumper, and you want to make sure you have this large bolt handy because it's really a two-person process to get this in, to line up everything. It's very tight tolerances, so it might be a little struggle. So we're going to keep this bolt handy as well as the mallet for a little bit of coercion. And my other set of hands on this, my youngest son. And a 1 1/8 socket fits this. How's the swing? Oh, hey, check this out. Oh yeah, smooth as butter. All right, so the next step is going to be installing the catch pin for the swing out. The T-handle basically just screws into the notch, and the catch here is a lot easier to install if you open it up and have the notch where it's gonna drop down into one of the holes. Ask me how I know. And we need a wrench. A 22mm wrench fits on here perfectly. Working on the latch side, we're going to be using this plate here and this bag here that says tire carrier latch and latch bracket. We're going to start on the latch side, actually installing the latch itself. And this latch basically indexes onto these bolts here. We're going to put everything on loosely, and it uses 4 1/4" bolts. So bolt, washer, nylock nut, and repeat with all the bolts. And tighten everything down with an 11 mil on both ends. And don't forget to leave the latch loose to adjust as needed. And now we're gonna open the swing up and work on the catch. When installing the plate, it goes plate on the inside of the tab, bolt with washer on it, from the outside going in. And now tighten everything down with a 13mm socket and wrench. And we're not gonna tighten all the way down. We're just gonna make it snug. That way we can make adjustments. It's time to adjust the latch, and you want this to be nice and secure. In the instructions, it says that the latches might actually settle and kind of stretch out a little bit, so make sure that you go back and just retighten everything up. But the process is basically, you want this to be square, this catch, you want it to be square and tight, and then you want the latch itself to kind of index as deep into it as you can possibly get without getting into the part that angles out. So this right here actually looks really good. And what I'm gonna do is I'm going to take a blue shop rag and a vice grip clamp, and I'm gonna clamp this catch into place, that way it doesn't move. When I clamped it down, it loosened up a little bit on me, but I know where the latch has to sit now, so I'm gonna tighten the latch down, and then I'm gonna readjust the catch plate, and then I'm gonna tighten that down second. So the latch is locked in place. Now let's work on this catch. All right, so I've got the catch right where I want it. I've got my wrench in the bottom, and I'm just kind of pressing with my thumb on there. I'm just gonna take my little impact here. Perfect. The very, very, very last step in installing the tire swing away carrier is an optional. I don't know if you got it or not. However, if you did, it is going to be the backup camera relocate. And this is the bag of wire that you have to cut your harness on, and it goes into this tab right here. Now, you have to cut basically the camera end off of the factory harness, and you're basically just extending that wire out to fit it in here. This is the one step of the process that I have really no issue doing. The reverse camera sucks anyway. Very, very low definition. It's hard to see anyway, so no problem cutting it. Maybe this will even help the problem. Step one is going to be dropping the tailgate and removing the tailgate panel here. In my case, I've got the Snail armor cover with the awesome Adventure Built logo. It has to come out, but only for a short time. And the factory panel removes in the exact same way. Inside the tailgate, this is the release latch for the tailgate itself. The camera is just next to it, and you have to remove the factory plug and the 2 bolts that adjoin in order to remove the camera from the housing. So first I'm going to remove the factory plug. Came out pretty easy. And now we're going to remove the camera itself. In with a 10mm socket. And that's it. The very not so awesome factory Toyota camera. Now for the wiring harness, I need this end clip. I need all this wire to come out of the tailgate, and the plug is right around here on the bottom of the tailgate. So what I'm going to do is use a pair of pliers to remove this clip here. All you do is compress and push, and that will pop that out. And this is where it feeds out of the tailgate at the bottom part right here. And there's the plug I need. There's another clip right here that's holding this wiring harness to the tailgate itself. I'm going to release that one as well. Oh, that's not releasing from the inside. Now I'm just going to take a big screwdriver and just force it out. All right, now that's out. I'm just going to stow this in here. All right, now I'm going to put the tailgate cover back on. And now we're going to mount the camera, and it mounts to this bracket that's right in the middle of the big tubing here on the swing arm, right above the license plate. And it mounts basically the same way that it came out of the tailgate. In the bag are 2 bolts, 2 nylock nuts, and 4 washers. And I'm going to install the camera from the back. The directions show a picture from the front, but I think it's actually going to mount it better from the back. It looks like it'll still work. Plus it'll be more low profile. It won't stick out quite as far. and we're gonna very gently tighten this down with an 11mm wrench and socket. All right guys, we are back to finish this up. So I got the new wire, and this is a 6 wire within the sheathing of this large gauge wire cable, I guess you would call it. The one I got from Morgan at AthFab was a 4 wire, which unfortunately my camera is a 6 wire, so it would not work. However, he sent me this 6 wire, so now we're set to get this thing going. In the kit are a bunch of these inline, I was calling them butt connectors, but really they're inline connectors, wire connectors. And I think if you really did all 6 in one bundle, it's gonna be this thick, which would just be a disaster trying to get. You'd end up having to electric tape wrap it, and I just don't like that. So we're gonna try to keep it nice and low profile, so I'm gonna solder each wire. Let's get it going. The very first thing I did was I rounded the wire harness through the bumper. That way it comes out kind of in this corner, and it's gonna basically run, and it's gonna get zip tied to these notches here on the swing away. But I wanna get this cleaned up. I wanna get these factory tie downs off. I want this to be as slick as possible. So I'm just gonna cut off this tag for whatever this is, and I guess it's a label for the harness in this factory tie down point. The length of cable I have is about 2.5 feet. I'm gonna see how much of it I really need. And to be cautious, I'm gonna cut it longer than what I want, and I can always hide it in the bumper. And honestly, I'm just gonna use this whole thing. I'd rather have more than less and be caught short. Now I'm gonna take a razor blade and open up this wire protector. So I'm gonna cut the harness probably 8 inches back from the plug itself to give me plenty of room in order to make this connection. I'm just gonna cut it here. I'm gonna begin this process by working on the plug side, and I'm going to strip this side back here to expose the wires. All right, now I can see what really we're working with here. So on the 2 different harnesses here, you can see they match up pretty closely as far as wire colors and diameters. However, on this one, there's blue and white are gonna be different. I'm going to connect the white to orange and then the blue to yellow. I made myself a little diagram here so I don't forget. Now I'm going to throw on some rosin paste flux. And mind you guys, I do not solder hardly at all. So if I'm doing this wrong, I'm sure you will all let me know. So now that that's dry, I'm gonna take the clamps off. All right, so I've only gotta do this 5 more times on this end, 6 times on the other end. I'm on the very last connection, and let me show you a couple of tips and tricks I just learned from doing this a few times. When you're cutting the wires, make sure you cut them to the exact same length of each one. I'm cutting the wire off of the harness side, the cable side, a little bit longer than the harness side, so I can get a couple more wraps out of it just to make it a little bit stronger. I started off with the automated wire strippers, but they didn't seem to do a good enough job with this thin gauge wire. So I went to the manual wire strippers. I put all of the heat shrink on the ends of the harness wire first. That way I didn't forget. There's no way you're gonna get this on after you do your solder. You'd have to cut it, and that's gonna be a super pain. So, and I'm also doing the make the X and then twist method. And it seems very solid. But obviously, if you are a wiring guy, I'm sure you know a better, more solid way to do it. Wiring is not my forte. I'm using this little wire holder deal and clamping it in here. Make sure that the heat shrink is all the way at the end, otherwise it might melt. And then kind of pull these wires back to give yourself plenty of room so you don't inadvertently get solder on those wires or heat them up too much. Get some resin on there. And I'm using lead solder. I think I've heard it just works better. And then just solder it up best I can. I'm gonna let this cool down for a minute and then put the heat shrink over. It's nice and cooled down. Take it off the wire holder here. I'm just gonna check it to make sure there's no wires poking out that's gonna damage the heat shrink. Push the heat shrink over and heat gun it. And all of this is gonna be way more low profile in a wiring harness than all of those inline connectors. So now I've got one large sleeve of heat shrink over all the connectors. Now let's heat shrink this down too. Now how good does that look? I'm moving on to the more challenging end of this wiring harness, and it's going to be hooking the wiring harness end into the truck itself. I moved my rolling workbench over to the truck so I can actually just work right off of that. I pulled this out of the frame as much as I could to give me the most amount of cable length possible, and it actually is quite a bit. It goes onto the table almost as much as it did before. Be sure to use a lot of light, keep your area organized, and I'm not a good electrical person, so if I can do this and hopefully it'll work, you should too. Now the first thing I'm gonna do is cut off about a foot of the large diameter heat shrink, and I'm gonna feed it over the wire. That way it's on there and I don't forget it because it needs to go on first. Oh, it's a boy. Now I'm gonna open up these two ends and start my connections. And I will link in the description below all of the different heat shrink and electrical connector items that I used, the different solders and the solder, the gun, everything. Now don't forget them. Another tip I figured out is all these wires being together, it was really hard to isolate this one wire. So I took them and I put them under the alligator clips here, and it actually isolated them very nicely. I'll tell you what, this is just a cheapy little wire holder off Amazon, but this has been the key to this project. I've definitely not been able to solder these very well, if at all, if it wasn't for this little thing right here. So I will link this in the description as well. All right, so I got all of the heat shrinking and all of the connections done. Now I'm going to slide the wire connector over. I found it's a lot easier to push it from the bottom than to pull it because it doesn't want to pull very easily. So just make sure you're tucking everything in as you're pushing it from the bottom. And there it is. All right, before I get too hot and heavy with this, let's plug it into the camera and see if it works. Moment of truth. Hey, it works. The camera works, which is really good news. I didn't want to have to problem solve that, why it wouldn't work. So thank goodness that's done. Now all we have to do is route this wire and this project will be completely done. I unplugged the camera end to make sure I route it through the frame. I don't want it to go over the frame. Through the bumper because it kind of comes out in the middle of the tailgate here. You can kind of see right here where the wires connect. Now I'm going to put another layer of sheathing over the wire just for protection. Again, I'm using this open braided, it's a split braided line. I really like this stuff. It will also be in the link in the description below. I'm going to start on the end with the plug, push it kind of all the way up to it, and then just start fishing it through. I just wrap the ends with electrical tape and it looks absolutely phenomenal. Looks completely factory. I'm going to plug it back into the camera and I'm going to route it kind of in a downward angle and zip tie it right here. Perfect. We are so close to the finish. As you can see, I got the full size spare finally mounted. I went through some issues with getting the wrong wheel, which kind of sucks. I got my RLD Designs canopy with my rooftop tent mounted right on top. I also ditched the factory spare with the chain assembly, so nothing's gonna rattle down there. It's all done. The very last thing, honestly, the last thing we have to do is going to be the flush mount reverse lights. These are from Diode Dynamics. These are the SS3, the 3-inch LED pods. Now these are a little pricey. They're 300 bucks for the set, which isn't crazy compared to say Baja Designs or KC, but these are really high quality and these are gonna last for years. I have no concerns with these whatsoever. The only bad thing about these lights is they don't fit the opening perfectly. I have to notch out the very top and the very bottom just like a 1/16 of an inch. I mean, it's just a super small recess, because unfortunately the way these mount, the bolt kind of gets in the way. So little recessing here, not a huge deal. It does suck because it's powder coated, but I'll touch it up with some paint and we'll go from there. My calculations were a little off with this one. Actually, I have to recess the entire top. You can kind of see on the back, it's more narrow than it is tall, and it fits side to side perfectly, and the holes line up perfectly, which is great. As you can see, this whole thing has to be recessed like I don't know, a 32nd, 16th of an inch. So I guess we're gonna grind a little. A little bit of grinding and these lights are ready to go in. I still have to grind the other side down, but honestly, it's so worth it to have a really quality light. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Diode Dynamic lights, but they are phenomenal. And also I will have a link in the description below. All right, let's get this other side done and then we'll start the wiring. Just gonna take the touch-up paint, go around anywhere that's bare metal just to protect it so it doesn't rust. These are the connectors that are gonna wire into the back of the light housing themselves. They plug in just like this. Then I'm going to basically make a harness connecting the two lights together and then running one wire all the way to the front of the truck under the engine compartment where I'm going to hook it into my VoSwitch. So basically what I did was I made like a little mini harness. This goes in passenger side, this goes in driver's side. They both connect into these two wires here, which I'm going to route all the way into the VoSwitch and then cover with the braided nylon wire. So this is the harness in its finished form. Everything is nice, tight, and protected. All I gotta do is do about 15 more feet of putting this wire in this cable housing protector, and then we'll put it in the truck. Here's my wiring harness. It looks really nice and factory and just super protected. I know that my previous wiring of my rock lights wasn't awesome, so I'm going super awesome this time. I know it's a little overkill and it's definitely a good run. I'd rather cut it down than be short. The paint is dry, we're gonna install the lights and then we're gonna start running the wires. Start by putting a gasket on the light itself. Make sure Diode Dynamic is facing up and insert. The Diode dynamic lights come with some really nice hardware. It's going to be bolt, nylon washer into the hole. And then on the back side, it's going to be flat washer, lock washer, nylock nut. This thing looks awesome. I'm gonna do the other one, start wiring. Gonna plug in the driver's side first, then route the passenger side through, plug in the passenger, and then route all of this harness to the front. I routed the harness cable all the way from the back to the front. Now it's going to the VoSwitch. I'm not going to show this. I will put a link in the description below showing how to link into the VoSwitch. It's super easy. I love this VoSwitch. All right, they are all wired up. Let's see if they work. Look at that. Of course they work. Why wouldn't they work? So that's it. It's finally done. And my very favorite part, putting the stickers on the control panel. All right guys, here it is, all installed. The Helm Fabrications high clearance rear bumper with rear tire carrier and backup camera relocate. It was a very lengthy process. By no means though was it difficult. It's just a lot of tiny little things you have to do that kind of just take a long time. So the three most time consuming portions were removing the rear bumper and all of the sensors out of it, cutting the bed sides for the high clearance bumper, and the wiring of the reverse camera. Those were by far the most time consuming portions of it. I would say all in all, it took me right around 10 to 12 hours start to finish if I wasn't doing video to install this bumper. Like I said, it's very time consuming, but not difficult. And it's way better if you have two people to do it. I did it mostly by myself and it just took a very, very long time with helpers here and there. And again, all of the tools I used to get this thing installed will be in the link in the description below. So check that out down there. All right guys, if you saw me do anything a little weird in the install process, comment below. I'd love to know your thoughts. Also, if you like Adventure Built, subscribe. It really does help the channel. Be sure to like, be sure to comment, be sure to hit the notification bell, and also follow us on Instagram, adventurebuilt_, and I'll see you guys next time.